So I've talked about this before on many of my videos, that when we leave the EU, there is going to be a massive lack of funding for a lot of the poor communities. Indeed, all the areas that voted to leave the European Union, all those areas received huge EU development grants that helped to build and, develop those places. That will be gone. And it doesn't just affect, town planning and things like that. There's a lot of stuff this will affect, and this will become massively noticeable, and no one is talking about this, which is infuriating even more. So anyway, this is a good article exactly about this, so here we go. It was buried deep in the last Conservative manifesto, a pledge after Brexit to retain the equivalent of a long-standing multi-billion pound European Union programme for the poorer parts of the UK's regions and nations, but will it and can it be honoured on the current scale, if at all? In scores of cities, towns and communities, the so-called EU structural funds have supported countless schemes for over 40 years, from groundbreaking scientific medical research to new university campuses, colleges, green energy, and more humble business startups, training and social programs. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been sustained and created. As the spending axe has fallen disproportionately on local councils since 2010, with some losing half of their budgets, these EU funds have become so important to town halls and their respective body in England. The Local Government Association is demanding action from senior ministers. Devolved governments in Cardiff and in Edinburgh are becoming restless too. In a detailed report, the Conservative-led Local Government Authority Association says local areas need the current levels of EU funding replaced by an estimated £4.8 billion in the current 6-year spending round. If hard-pressed councils are to continue delivering economic and social programmes in the face of a tightening Whitehall yoke, Kevin Bentley, the deputy leader for the Essex County Council, who heads the LGA, the Brexit Task Group, says that the future-wide-ranging EU programme delivered mainly through the Regional Development Fund has been a major concern since the referendum. It has been used and helped to set up businesses, create many jobs, roll out broadband and build new roads and bridges. And with national funding for regeneration increasingly depleted, many areas have become increasingly reliant on that money. Take Cornwall, which ironically voted for Brexit. It has received the highest level of EU regional development support from 2007 to 2013 alone. It got 634 million for a range of projects including higher speed broadband. Newquay Airport alone received 40 million for an upgrade, while the EU aid elsewhere went to a range of business startups, marine technology, geothermal energy and the much heralded Eden project. Wales similarly benefited from not only wide-ranging job creation schemes, but also substantial investment in higher education, including 100 million for a science and innovation campus at Swansea University. Through a mix of 4 million from the EU structural funds and 6 million from the European Investment Bank, understandably, like the LGA, the Welsh Government is alarmed by an absence of any firm commitments, aside from vacuous statements to deliver on replacement programmes from EU schemes post-Brexit. While the last Tory manifesto promised a shared prosperity fund to replace the EU structural funds, the LGA simply noted details have been scarce. When asked for what progress is being made on the proposal of decisions with local councils and development administrations in Wales and Scotland, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy said simply, Plans for a formal consultation process will be announced in due course. They acknowledged that the EU structural funds had delivered important economic and environmental benefits to the UK before adding, as we leave the EU, we will be delivering the UK Shared Prosperity Fund that will be specifically designed to reduce inequalities between communities across our four nations. This strikes at the heart of the dispute between the Welsh and the Scottish governments and Westminster. Both Cardiff and Holyrood suspect that by accident or design it is arbitrarily undermining devolved powers over EU programmes by assuming responsibility for a UK-wide replacement fund. Whatever its size and scope, the Welsh government insisted, we have repeatedly made it clear to the UK government that we expect the funding we currently receive from Europe to continue to be available to Wales after we leave the EU. And Brexit must not turn out to be a power grab by Whitehall. North of the border, where the EU structural funds for the current 2014-2020 period are worth £182 million, the Scottish Government voiced similar concerns, stressing that it had benefited significantly from EU aid in supporting jobs and delivering infrastructure and sustaining rural communities. A spokesman added, we continue to push the UK government to ensure that Scotland's finances are not detrimentally affected as a result of exiting the EU. But in England, specifically, the LGA's concern is compounded by indecision over how to finance local government from 2020, where central funding was supposed to be phased out as councils effectively became self-sustaining. A local government finance bill for England only, passed through Parliament earlier this year, was meant to drive this forward by devolving all businesses' rates back to town halls, but the bill fell in the run-up to the general election and has not been resurrected. As a result, English councils are in limbo. In the words of a senior figure in local government, we are approaching our own cliff edge, and as things stand, central funding for English councils is coming to an end, and some authorities are fighting for financial survival. In the meantime, the powerful farming lobby, backed by environmental and amenity groups like the National Trust, is making and running with its demands to retain the current level of EU agricultural subsidies after Brexit, albeit perhaps diverted to other countryside and conservation projects, but not significantly to equally pressing issues like affordable rural local housing and job creation. At present, these subsidies deliver £30 billion annually to farmers and are double the level of EU structural funding, with the biggest landowners getting the largest slice. So far, the lobby to maintain funding for the UK's more challenging areas are currently receiving EU structural funds. This has been muted. But as it gets louder, perhaps the time to change the terms of the debate and ask why landowners are more deserving of handouts of those languishing in towns and communities in desperate need of renewal and support. It is about shared prosperity, after all. So that's the current state, and that article was pretty recent. Yeah, that was in August last year, so sort of recent. But we are still in that same situation. There are still no word on, as was said, what is this going to be, and the UK cannot maintain that level of funding, and as a result, huge areas are going to, find massive financial stabilities. You will get the case of, after Brexit, I guarantee it now, you will come into the case of local councils being unable to sustain themselves. As has already been mentioned, local councils are expected to be now self-sustaining, and this will be a massive blow to many councils who do not have large industrial either supports or good, thriving business communities. This will hurt huge swathes of councils and, leave many of them hugely struggling. This is going to be a disaster of epic, of epic proportions, and this is not being talked about at all.